bells of Paris are not singing for worship tonight. They are stuttering warnings into the cold. Moonlight runs like steel along the Seine, and out on that blade a rumor becomes shape. Dragon-proud longships sliding upriver in a slow, relentless heartbeat. At their prow stands a figure bundled in furs, Ragnar, watching the city draw near as if measuring a debt. In shuttered rooms, children count the carved heads and whisper numbers like prayers. The river, which yesterday ferried wine and wheat to market, now ferries a possibility no one wished to imagine. Is this an invasion, a test, or the cruelest kind of negotiation? On both banks, fires gutter, dogs bark, and the wind carries a salt smell. Paris has no business knowing this far inland. If you lean out over the parapet, you hear it clearly. Not drums, not chants, oars, row, breathe, row, breathe. With each pull, the Vikings are not merely approaching. They are rewriting the map of where fear is allowed to travel. Days earlier, West Franch's court had turned into a granary of bad news. Charles the Bald, grandson of Charlemagne, listened as messengers emptied their sacks. Rouen harried, monasteries stripped to bare stone, villagers fleeing with icons wrapped in linen. The Seine, a friendly road in gentler years, had become a Viking boulevard. Some said the river was black with hulls. Others claimed it was the sky that blackened at the sight. Charles deployed men the way anxious hands stack furniture against a door. One force to meet the raiders upstream, another to guard the roads and bridges, pinning Paris to its island heart. But rivers slip around plans, and plans grow brittle in cold air. The king faced an old question sharpened by a new enemy. Do you trust your walls, your god, your soldiers, or your treasury? Delay too long, and the river will choose for you. Decide too quickly, and you may feed a hunger that will only return. The longships did not race. They studied. Built for seas that taught humility with fists, they now prowled a river that rewarded fluency. The Vikings moved in rhythm, oars, eyes, breath, slicing distance into units of intent. They tested landing places, scouted ferries, cut small roads so that larger ones would feel suddenly fragile. A few Frankish outposts loosed arrows, thin and early. The Vikings answered with fire that felt like punctuation. Sentence 1, we are here. Sentence 2, we are coming. Along the banks, peasants shoved household saints and sick goats into carts, a whole countryside reduced to what could be carried. The closer the raiders came, the more their reputation arrived first. Scaling walls rumor could climb faster than men. Ragnar did not have to shout. He let the Seine pronounce him. I am a path, and this is the traveler made for me. Medieval Paris clung to the Ile de la Cité like a fist, its knuckles the bridges. High, proud ring walls would come later. For now, timber and cunning and courage were the city's armor. The bridges mattered more than any prayer. Break them, and the island becomes a thorn that draws blood from the river. Hold them, and the thorn pricks anyone who grasps at it. Bells called militia to the parapets, while priests raised reliquaries that had outlived earthquakes and emperors. The smell was tallow, wet wood, and fear. Women sealed shutters, then unsealed them to look upon what fear demanded to be seen. When the fog lifted, it lifted like a curtain. Shields flashed, oars stilled, and for one long, theatrical moment, the current carried the longships in silence. Someone loosed an arrow from the walls, duty or panic guiding the hand, and silence broke in the oldest language men speak to one another: violence. Charles's field strategy cracked where paper never warned it would: in mud and morale. One Frankish contingent, meant to bite the Viking flank, instead met them frontally on a bank softened to treachery. Shields turned to splinters, and the river took any man who stepped a half-foot too far. Meanwhile, the second Frankish force squinted through cold and rumor, its timing staggered, its confidence debating itself out loud. Ragnar hammered the weaker hinge, not for glory, but for a lesson. Discipline fell to rhythm. A banner dipped, then vanished, and with it vanished the hope that a single decisive stand would save Paris. The Vikings did not need to annihilate the king's men. They needed to corrode the king's options. When the clamor died, the survivors on the walls learned something as cruel as it was clear. A city can be besieged even when its walls have not yet been touched. Siege is less a circle than a tightening spiral. The Vikings did not camp as statues. They roamed, pinching roads, burning storehouses, snatching ferries like pulling seams from a garment. Every flame on the bank was a calculation pushed across the water. Inside the city, another kind of fire caught. Debate. Men of the cloth counted coin and conviction. Men of the sword counted arrows and uninjured backs. The word ransom stepped into the room as if it had always been there, waiting to be noticed. Paris had precedents to consider. Other cities had paid, had lived, had swallowed pride like a bitter pill. Yet ransom is not merely money. It is a story you tell your enemy about how much you fear tomorrow. The bridges groaned. The markets turned to rumor. Mothers rationed hope the way they rationed bread. And still the river moved, indifferent, escorting both courage and dread. Easter approached, a sacred hinge on which the Christian year swings. To be attacked at such a time is to be told that your holiest hour is just ordinary daylight to your enemy. Ragnar understood theater. He made the approach a show. Shields in mirrored scales, oars lifted to let the current deliver the tableau. The defenders bristled on the bridges. The clergy hoisted relics radiant with memory. The Vikings probed, then raided with a surgeon's cruelty. Granaries sliced open, pastures churned to frost and ash. Stories say they staged hanging trees within sight of the parapets to let fear work on both sides of the wall. Whether exact or embellished, the effect was real. Paris began to negotiate in its sleep. When citizens start counting coins the way they used to count psalms, the mathematics of survival has entered the room. The question was no longer if the city would pay, but how much of itself it could keep. 7,000 pounds of silver is not a sum. It is a procession. Carts creaked. Ledgers bled ink. Clerks licked dry quills and wrote numbers that felt blasphemous. Priests blessed sacks, as if salvation could be weighed. On the riverbank, Viking treasurers handled the ransom like craftsmen, testing, tallying, letting skepticism do its security. Ragnar watched with a patience that looked like contempt, and was, more likely, strategy. He had proved a point sharper than an axe. The Seine could carry war to a city. Silver could carry it away. Inside Paris, the relief was complicated, a knot of gratitude and shame. What had been saved? What had been sold? In halls where the air now smelled faintly of money, men told themselves the necessary story. Better a lightened treasury than a burned altar. Better practical humility than righteous ruin. They said it again until the words sounded like wisdom. Departure did not arrive like a festival. It arrived like frost receding, quiet, partial, leaving damage crisp at the edges. The Viking camp thinned, longships inhaled warriors and exhaled distance, and rumors slipped into their place. Some raiders, the talk went, sickened on the downriver drift. Perhaps plague had circled the camp to take its tithe. Perhaps that was only Paris's need to imagine balance in a world that had just sold it none. In streets that had been prayer and panic, workshops reopened. Markets remembered how to sound like laughter. The bridges were repaired with a new kind of paranoia in the joints, as if certainty could be hammered into wood. Charles began to think in terms of rivers as fortresses, tolls, towers, patrols, like a king trying to teach water to obey. And yet the more lasting repair happened in speech. Parents telling children the city had not fallen, though it had bent. That bending was sometimes how one keeps from breaking. Why does the siege of Paris in 845 endure? Not because it was the most violent episode of an age already fluent in violence. nor because it swapped borders that historians still argue over. It endures because it rewrote expectations in ink that did not wash off. It taught Europe that mobility plus nerve could bruise a capital without scaling its walls, that a river could be both lifeline and blade, that ransom, however distasteful, can be the calculus by which a people choose tomorrow. It taught Vikings that story is strategy. The tale of Paris paying traveled farther than any longship, recruiting men who preferred risk to rent. And it taught Paris something stern, that guarantees do not live in stone alone. If you search the Seine at night, you can still hear the lesson in the hush between wakes. When a problem arrives by water that you cannot kill, learn its current, count your coin, and choose what you will save. Ragnar did not conquer Paris. He conquered the idea that Paris could not be made to pay attention. After him, the city became itself more fiercely, walls higher, yes, but also eyes wider, the kind that never again forget the grammar of a river or the price of a quiet bell.